Hello everyone and welcome to Metro Exodus. So this is one I've been excited for a while because I really enjoy the Metro games and there's nothing quite like them. I guess you could say they're kind of like a sister series to Stalker in that way, that they're both different and there's really no other game that replaces them. Although Metro and Stalker don't really have a lot of actual mechanical similarities besides just the sort of aesthetic ones. But yeah, so this is the new Metro game and it has a couple of interesting things about it, a couple of kind of maybe divisive things about it, which we'll talk about a little bit later, including the whole Epic Store thing. And really, it's quite the thing. So I think the first thing that a lot of people knew about this game that they talked about was that it was going to be more open than the other Metro games. So we'll start there. Now, some people have called this open world, mostly people that haven't played it, because it is actually not an open world game at all. It is, well, back in the day, when this kind of level structure was actually used a lot, it was often called a Crysis 2-like level structure, because Crysis 2 is one of the earlier games that actually did this style of thing, where you're still in a linear progression of levels. There are stages that you go between. It's not one big giant world that you can go to any point at any point you want. But they're very large, and there are lots of different ways to approach them. So they're open areas, but not an open world, and Metro very much does that as well. And if we're going with the Stalker comparison, then we'll say, like the first Stalker only, really. Shadow of Chernobyl had the same idea, being a linear progression of levels, some of them very confined, some of them quite large and open, and had multiple ways to approach objectives, but they were still a linear progression nonetheless, and it is not an open world. That's exactly what Metro is like in this case. Some people have said that they are maybe afraid that it would lose some of its atmosphere because, well, it is Metro, and the atmosphere of Metro is dark, claustrophobic, tense, all the time. And I will say that it is not that anymore, but it does still have a lot of that. I would say that this game really has two kind of big points of atmosphere to its advantage. It still has some levels and some areas in the open levels that do the whole very tight, claustrophobic, dark, confined areas with mutants and things lurking around and lots of stealth involved and all sorts of that. Just like the older Metro games, or previous Metro games, are not old, this does that, and it does it very well, just as well, in fact, as the others, maybe even better sometimes because of the way it feels to actually find these confined bunkers and other sorts of things in the open areas and actually explore them as like a separate sub-area. And then it also has the more open atmosphere of the larger areas themselves that all of this takes place in. And in this case, I actually am going to make a Stalker comparison because it's actually... Do you remember, say, for instance, if you've ever played Shadow of Chernobyl, the first time you went to Red Forest, which is a pretty large open area with many ways to go around it, but it has its own very specific atmosphere. It's not like the atmosphere of, say, the X-Labs in those games, which is very confined and scary and dark, but it does have a very important aspect of atmosphere that isn't really replicated anywhere else, and that's pretty much what these open areas are like. They are very atmospheric in their own way, they're just not the tight, confined atmosphere that the other areas are known for. So I think both of those are actually really important, and this game does both very well. But if you're looking for exclusively the former, the confinement and things, that's not actually what you're going to find here. It's more like a half and half kind of thing. Now, for the exploration and all of that, obviously that has been enhanced a lot by the whole, large open areas thing, because there are lots of places to find. There are little bases that you can go to sleep and pass time and heal yourself and craft weapons and all that stuff, which I'll go on to the crafting system in a minute. And there's also just lots of little side areas where there are sub-objectives and things like that, because the people that you're traveling with can actually give you sort of side quests, in a sense, that they want you to go to other areas and do things. And if you want to, you can just go linearly from the point that you start to the point that you have the main story objective and just do that, and ignore all the stuff on the side if you want to. But the stuff on the side is usually pretty cool and does involve a lot of the change of atmosphere from the large open areas to the small areas. Like in the first big open area that you'll come to very early in the game, which is called Volska, is a big... kind of a swampy area. It clearly wasn't before, but now it's like horribly flooded and things from the whole nuclear spring idea. And it's got a lot of really cool bits in it, and there's one bit sort of near the center of it that was a sort of radioactive material dumping facility, effectively, like an old sort of silo grounds. And you actually can get in it, and the whole thing is just like filled with mutants and very tight spaces, and it's very dark in there. And then, you know, you go back out of it to this large, bright, open area, so that kind of shows you early on in the game what the contrast is going to be like between the two. And it's pretty neat. The game does have also a day-night cycle. It's very long and very smooth, so like it transitions between day and night in a very slow, smooth way instead of abruptly turning nighttime and then suddenly turning daytime later. It does it slowly, which is useful, I think, to keep up the atmosphere of the open areas, because they actually change a lot. Some areas in the daytime will have specific hazards that you might need to encounter, like, for instance, daytime near a den of a bunch of lurkers. You'll see all these holes in the ground, and a bunch of lurkers will be all around the whole area, and you just don't want to go there during the daytime, because as soon as they hear you above, they'll all swarm you, and you'll be, having to fight off like 8 or 9 or more of the things at once, and probably die. Whereas at night, you could safely sneak through that area because they'll be asleep, and as long as you don't make too much noise and don't shine your light around all over the place, you'll be able to get through it at night. And however, other things happen at night. Your more nocturnal predators, anomalies, that's the word I was looking for, the electrical anomalies and other things like that come out at night, so you have to worry about that. I thought that moment was pretty cool when I discovered that these things were actually appearing around at night, because that was a pretty memorable part of the previous games, actually coming upon one of those anomalies down in the metro, but there was usually only one of them. It was like one specific scene. Whereas in this case, on the surface, they actually appear in small numbers but reliably at night, so you actually have to be careful about them in multiple places. And they are pretty indiscriminate. They will kill mutants and other bandits and things, and yourself, so just stay away from them effectively. And then there are also the areas sort of between the large open areas that happen because of story progression, like the one you were just seeing there in the background before it switched. That was a bunker full of cannibals, and you end up there through means that I will not spoil, but yeah, it happens. And you have to pretty much get through the bunker, and it reminds me a lot of the earlier Metro games, like for instance in, I think it was Last Light, wasn't it, where you have to sneak through the Reich's bunker and try not to get killed by all of them. It's very much like that kind of atmosphere, and it's pretty cool. And I think it shows that the developers very much know what they're doing, and I think there's no reason to doubt the ability for them to create a really interesting atmosphere for their games, because it doesn't matter if it's in one of those confined spaces or in a more open area, they still can, handle both of them quite well, which I'm pleased by. Combat in this game is also pretty good because there's a lot of variety to it, which was the case in the previous Metro games as well. And in this case, it's actually got a bit more added to it because of the crafting system. So let's get on to that. There is a basic but good enough crafting system in the game where you collect sort of mechanical and chemical resources to combine into various things. You can make medkits for yourself, although they're fairly expensive on the chemical resources, so you can't just make an infinite number of those. And you can even make ammunition for the various weapons that you have. Some ammo, like say the ball bearings for the Tikar, or is it Tihar, is quite cheap because they're just ball bearings. That's not complicated. And then some of them, like say shotgun shells or explosive rounds for the Tikar, is the pneumatic rifle. They're very expensive, and you will not be, trundling around with tons of those at any point because you just won't find that many. So this allows you to kind of do the whole Metro thing of being very careful to scavenge for resources, only in this case you actually craft things with them. The crafting system is good, and it adds a lot to the combat because the guns themselves have a pretty deep customization system where different guns can have all sorts of various attachments and alterations attached to them. So like this revolver right here, for instance, I put an 8-shot cylinder on it and a suppressor on it, as well as a red dot, so I can use it as like a close range, sort of stealthy takedown weapon, which I feel is always good to have in Metro. And then you could say get the Kalash, which is basically an AK, and put things like an extended magazine on it, and or even like a drum magazine, and actually turn it into a sort of light machine gun style form. You can do all sorts of things with it. I actually had mine customized with a long barrel and made it into more of like a battle rifle. And you can find all sorts of other things, like, for instance, the Shambler, the famous odd mechanical shotgun thing, weird monster thing that was in the previous games, is here as well, and there are lots of different modifications for it that change how it works. For instance, you can actually add more than 3 shots to it by having a larger sort of mechanical body to it that can actually accept more than that now. and other things like that, and you can of course get the A-shot and make it into like a quad-barreled shotgun if you want to, because that's ridiculous. And there are some other pretty interesting weapons I don't want to spoil too much of, but things like, for instance, it's, I think, called a Gatling, but it's really more like a chain gun, because it's like a dual-barreled, chain-driven, repeating rifle that's really cool and very heavy, so you won't be walking around particularly quickly when you're using it. That can be modified with extra barrels and all sorts of other crazy stuff, and it eats through your assault rifle ammo like crazy. And there's even a railgun type attachment, so you do get into the somewhat sort of science-y, fiction-y weapons that the previous Metro games have dipped into very lightly. And in this case, they are just the same as the other games, where it's very late in the game, and there are very few of them, but they do exist and are very effective if you manage to make use of them properly. So, as far as weapons go, there's a ton of variety here. In fact, I would say that there's the most variety of any of the games because of the attachment and customization system for weapons being present here. It's really cool. You also have to worry about cleaning your weapons. For instance, if you can whip out your anyway, you can whip out that right there, the backpack, and actually make some limited things in the field, like a couple of more simple types of ammunition that don't require like actual reloading tools, and you can customize your guns with the attachments that you have on you like this. But you can also find workbenches scattered around the world that will allow you to do more, like for instance change out one weapon for a different one entirely, make more complicated ammo types, including custom ones like the explosive rounds, and clean your weapons. As you fire your weapons and just use them in nasty places, which is pretty much everywhere because it's Metro, they will get gross, and that will actually affect their performance in various ways, from their fire rate, if it's a fast-firing weapon, to their accuracy for something like a pistol, to just their general damage in some weapons' case. So you'll have to clean these with the chemical resources and make them nice and shiny and new occasionally to make sure that your shots are actually placed where you're pointing. The game does go crazy with the whole, I called it manual immersion, was the concept. The idea that everything in Metro is something that you have to do, whereas a lot of other games would do the things for you. Like, for instance, your flashlight has to be charged, pneumatic weapons have to be pumped, you have an actual physical map and clipboard instead of like a map screen and objective screen. All sorts of things like that. They're all in this game too, just like the previous games, and they work exactly the same, except now there are even more, because there are things like the night vision goggles, another electronic piece of equipment that I will not spoil, and some other pretty cool stuff. And of course, more types of weapons that work differently and have these various attachments also mean that you will have to maintain them in a more manual fashion, which is, part of what makes Metro so atmospheric. The atmosphere is that you're very much part of a small team doing things in a very makeshift way as best you can. And even though this has gone to a larger, more open space sort of format, it has not lost that atmosphere at all. You still do that. And you even have the lighter still to light up areas without using your battery, and also burn down the spider bug nest areas. And you can, of course, shine your light on the spider bugs to make them flip over and take more damage. Or you can, like I chose to do here, switch out to the night vision goggles so you can actually see everything else around you and maybe use more ammo but not get ambushed as easily by them. The world itself, the locations that you go to, are very detailed. There's a ton of detail in the areas. Some might say almost too much. I don't think so, but there's a lot. Every little side area, even just tiny inconsequential things like a little ruined building somewhere, will have some sort of story to it oftentimes. In fact, there's one area in Volska, the first open area that you come to, that is basically like on a little bitty island by itself, and it's a clinic, basically, where a bunch of people died on the surface from radiation poisoning. And it actually has a lot of that classic supernatural parts of Metro in it, where you see ghosts that look like blast shadows and some other creepy stuff like that. You hear voices and whispers and all that stuff. That's actually in this game still. I've heard some people say that there's not enough of that classic supernatural element stuff in this one, but that's actually untrue, because even from the beginning, there's a couple of places like that are very creepy and have some strange happenings going on. And as you get farther and farther into the game, just like the previous two games, there's more and more of that sort of supernaturally element to it, where some kind of crazy, not easily explainable things start to happen. And it gets more crazy as you go on. Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about that for spoiler reasons as well. Some people have criticized it for being a very slow game, and it is. It is a very slow game, very deliberate, lots of sneaking, lots of just slow movements and holding buttons, and it's a slow-paced game. It is. I don't mind that because that's sort of what these games are to me. These more tactical shooters like Stalker, like Metro, they're very slow. And that's what I expect when I go into them, and that's what I got. But if you maybe haven't played a Metro before, or you're not into the sort of slower pace of deliberate, sneaky gameplay, this might not be for you, because it definitely is slow. You don't move that quickly, although there's a sort of somewhat hidden mechanic by the way I mean that it doesn't actually tell you about it, that the more gear you have on you, the slower you move. So you can actually move quite quickly if you're lightly equipped. But still, you will want to move slowly in lots of areas, especially if you're going for the good endings, because you don't necessarily want to kill everything. There are certain places that you want to not go loud in if you can help it. That's actually a bit of an improvement, by the way, over the previous games. The previous 2 games have had 2 endings, a sort of bad one and a good one based on certain decisions. This case, there are multiple endings, but there's also multiple endings for each of the open areas that you go to, depending on your choices in it. And they involve, for instance, in the Volska area, there are these kind of crazed cultist people that are in like an anti-technology religion, and you're not supposed to kill any of them. There are multiple areas where you will have to sneak around bits where they are in, but if you want the good ending of the area, you have to make sure you don't kill any of them. Other bandits around the area, stuff like that, they're fair game, and the cannibals and things like that, you can kill them. But the game will very much tell you when you need to be careful about actually killing people in a certain area, because they're not necessarily meant to be enemies at all times. And if you do that well, you can actually get a good ending for the particular area while you move on to the next one, and if you do something different, you might get a different ending. And the endings are actually pretty impactful because they actually do matter, and characters' fates and things change depending on all of this. So I suppose we also have to talk about the Epic Store thing, because yes, unfortunately, a deal was reached between Koch Media, the owners of the publishers of this game, and the Epic Store to make it exclusive to the Epic Store for 1 year and take it off of Steam, which was a really terrible move in my opinion that will help no one and does not benefit the people that need it the most, i.e. the actual purchasers of the game and the developers of the game 4A. Both of those were the ones that were hurt by this decision, whereas Koch Media and Epic already have the money flowing in between them for the decision, so yeah, it's really crappy, and I am not gonna, tell people whether or not they should buy this one, but if you decide, even though it looks amazing, that you don't want to buy it right now because of that decision, I'm not gonna blame you at all, and I'd say that makes sense, and if you don't want to support that, then don't, because it's a pretty crappy thing that definitely shouldn't have happened, and it only hurts gamers and the developers, the people that actually need to not be hurt the most. Now, aside from that, yeah, I think this game is actually pretty amazing. It's got a couple of buggy issues that have been reported, and a couple of patches have already been issued to fix some of them. There are more. I haven't had any major game-breaking bugs yet, but there have been a few reports of some pretty unfortunate things happening, so if you are going to buy it but are afraid of that, maybe take a look at their forums and things to make sure that the patches are going to fix ones that you're possibly worried about. It also runs pretty well. It is absolutely gorgeous with detail, and it runs pretty well, but there are some areas like Caspian, for instance, the second open area, that don't run as well as others, but still run pretty well depending on your setup. So it's not like it's well optimized, but it's not perfectly optimized. So really, that's Metro Exodus. I think it is very much deserving of the Metro name, and it is a tremendous amount of fun. And, well, it's $50 right now. I'll link you below to the description, in the description to the Epic Store page right now, and we'll see how that goes. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.